In this tutorial, we'll be adding custom startup logic and user profile information using Firebase. Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of the Firebase and Flutter series. The video for today will have 3 main goals. The first one is to add a custom startup logic functionality. What this means is when we are logged in as a Firebase user on the app, we want to show the home view instead of the authentication views. The second thing we'll be doing is adding custom user profile information for Firebase users. This will allow us to store additional information like the user ID, the user's email, the user's phone number, and the user type for certain user roles. And the last thing for this video will be to make sure that that user is available throughout the app from the start of the application. So as usual, there is a startup project that you can go download from fullstacks.com or from the link in the description below. Once you've downloaded the code, you can open it up in your IDE of choice and then fetch all the packages before we start developing. The first thing we'll tackle is the custom startup logic. The method of implementation that I like is by creating a view that will always be the first view shown, called the startup view, and in the on model ready for that view's view model will perform all of the actions required. So go to the views folder under the UI folder and create a new file called startup view. This will be a stateless widget called startup view. We will return as the root of the build function a view model provider of type startup view model. And we'll use the with consumer constructor. What this means is that when the notify listeners is called within the view model, this builder function that we are supplying at the moment will be rebuilt and allow us to show a new state for the UI based on the state of the view model. We'll supply a view model of type startup view model, and we'll also supply the builder function, and the root of that builder function will be a scaffold with the background color set to white. For the body of the scaffold, we will use a center widget, and for the center widget's child, we will use a column, and we'll set the main axis size of this column to minimum. This will make sure that the column wraps our children, making it small enough for the center widget to place it in the center of the view. The first thing we'll add is the image that I want to show while it's loading. We'll use a sized box to provide a size for the image. We'll give it a width of 300 and a height of 100, and for the child of the sized box, we'll supply an image with an asset path that you can copy from the pubspec.yaml file. It's assets/image/icon large.png. And for the loading indication, we will use a circular progress indicator. We'll set the stroke width to 3. And for the value color property, we will pass in an always stopped animation. And for the color, we will use the hex code that we get from checking the icon large color using a color picker. You can set the hex code to 0xFF19C71. Then you can go to the view models folder and you can create a new file called startup view model. Then inside that file, you can create a new class that extends the base model called startup view model. Head back over to your startup view and import the startup view model. Then you can go over to the main file and you can change the home view to the startup view. Now for the rest of the app development, unless we need to check a different view on startup, we will always have the startup view because that's where we'll perform our logic that will determine which view to navigate to next. We can run the code and you'll see that the first view that we see is the startup view with the compound logo. We're not seeing the circular progress indicator, and I think that is because we left out a value in the hex code itself. We need to add another C in between the 7 and the 1 to make it a complete hex code with the color that we chose. Then we can start with the actual implementation. We'll open up the authentication service and we'll add a new function that returns a future of type boolean called isUserLoggedIn. We'll make this function async, and then we'll create a new variable called user, which will get the current user from the Firebase auth instance. For the return value, all we'll do is check if the user is not equal to null. When you log out on Firebase, or if you haven't logged in, the user property on the instance is always null. So we can just check if the user is there, which will tell us if someone has logged in before. Head over to the startup view model and create a new function called handle startup logic that returns a type future and that we mark as async. Then we'll keep a reference to the authentication service at the top, and we'll use the locator to fetch the authentication service. And since we're working on navigation functionality, we'll also store the navigation service at the top, and we'll use the locator as well to get the navigation service. We'll start off the function by creating a new variable called hasLoggedInUser. We'll await on the call on the authentication service that checks is user logged in. Then we'll add our conditionals. We'll check if the user has logged in, and if the user has logged in, we'll call on the navigation service and we'll navigate to home view route. And if the user has not logged in, we will navigate to the login view route. Then head back to the startup view, and we will supply a onModelReady callback function that returns our model. And in the callback function, all we'll do is call handle startup logic. So if you uninstall the app and you run it from the beginning, you should land up on the login view. We can then log in with one of the users that we have created in part 1. This will take you to the home view. Then you can stop the application and start it up again. This time when the app starts up and you go past the splash screen, you'll see that you go directly to the home view instead of the login view. And that's all we have to do for the custom startup logic. Next up, we'll add a custom user profile to Firestore. We want to store the user's full name, the ID from the Firebase authentication, the email, and the user type, which will be user or admin. Go over to the Firebase console and open up the compound project. Then go over to the left side and click on the database icon. When you go into the database tab for the first time, you should see an orange banner that says get started or create database. Click on create DB, and for the rules we will use the test rules for now until we set up rules in one of the future videos. Then we'll create a users collection as one of the root collections. When you click next, you'll be asked to create a document. We will click on auto ID and then create that document with empty fields. That's all we need for the Firebase console setup. Now we can head back to the code. You can open up the pubspec file, and we'll start by adding the Cloud Firestore package version 0.13.0+1. Then, to ensure that the packages pulled in works on the Android project, open up the build.gradle file in the app folder of the Android project and change the min SDK to version 21. That's it for the code setup. Let's get to the implementation of our user profiles. We'll start by adding the model that will represent our user profile information. So under the models folder, create a new file called user. This will be a plain class called user. It will have a final property of type string called ID. It will have another final property of type string called full name. We'll have another property email, as well as a property to store the user role. We'll pass all of these values in through the constructor, and it will all be named parameters. Then we'll add the function to serialize the Firebase data into a user object. We'll add a constructor called fromData. It will take in a map with a key of type string and the value being dynamic. We'll call the parameter data. Then we can do inline assignment of the variables in the fromData named constructor. For ID, we'll set that equal to the ID key from the data map. For full name, we'll do the same for email as well as for the user role. Then we'll add another function to make the adding of the data into the Firestore documents easier. So a Firestore document is actually a JSON file. So what we'll do is create a function called toJSON that returns a map with a key string and the type dynamic. We'll start off by adding the first key ID and setting it equal to the value of ID. And then we'll copy that line 4 times and then just replace each of the keys with the name of the property in the top of the file. Now that that's complete, we want to add the fields to the sign-up view that will give us the new values that we've added. So head over to the sign-up view and we'll add a new text editing controller to the top named full name controller. Then we can duplicate the input field for email and the vertical small space by highlighting it and pressing Alt Shift and the up arrow key. For the Mac users, that would be the Option, Shift and the up arrow key. We'll change the placeholder of the input field to full name and the controller to the full name controller. Next up, we'll add a drop-down / expansion list to select between the user and the admin type. This won't be the case in the real-world application. We'll probably assign the values to the user profile on the back end. But to keep things simple, we'll add it into the UI so we can select our user role when we sign up. So under the password field, we'll add a vertical space small, and then we'll add an expansion list of type string. This is a custom widget that you can find within the widgets folder of the code base. This widget takes in a list of items to display. We'll provide it with a list of strings. The first value will be admin and the second value will be user. Then it requires a title to display at all times. For the title, we'll set it equal to a value on the model called selected role. It also has a callback function called onItemSelected. We'll supply it with a function from the model called setSelectedRole. Then you can open up the sign-up view model. We'll add a private string value called selectedRole, and for the startup value, we'll set it to select a user role. This will be the title that's shown as soon as the view is opened and nothing has been selected. Then we'll create a property getter called selectedRole, and it will return the private selectedRole value. Then for the function to set the selected role, we'll create a void function called setSelectedRole that takes in a string called role, and all we'll do is set the selected role equal to the private value and then call notify listeners. To ensure a faster testing process, go to the main file and change the home to the sign up view. Make sure to run a Flutter clean before you try and run the application, because sometimes the Cloud Firestore library doesn't sync properly and it takes quite a while to build. And if you run the code, you'll see on the sign up view we now have the full name input field at the top as well as the select user role at the bottom. Currently this view is not a list view, so when you open up the expansion list and the keyboard is in view, you will get the overflow widget error. But to fix that, all you have to do is change the column to a list view. We can go ahead and fill in all of our details, and if you click on the expansion list, you'll have admin and user as the selectable types. Next up, we want to make use of all of these new properties and pass it into our authentication service when we create our user. So open up the authentication service and then copy the password properties and change the second one to full name and the last one to role. Then open up the sign up view model, and in the sign up with email we can now pass in the full name, which will pass in through the sign up function. And for the role value, we'll use the selected role in the view model properties. That's it for the updates in terms of getting all the values into the functions where it's required. Next up, we'll create a new service that will interact with our Firestore database. So under services, create a new file called Firestore service. It will be a class called Firestore service. The first thing we'll do is create a final private collection reference to the user's collection. We'll set the user's collection reference equal to firestore.instance.collection and give it the value users. The value for that collection should always match the root collection in your Firestore database. Then we'll create a new function called createUser that will return a type future. It will take in the user model and it will be a sync. Then we'll add our try catch statement. For the catch part of the statement, we will return the message from the exception. Then for the actual functionality, we will await on the call. We'll go to the user collection reference. We'll get the document using the user ID, which is the ID from the Firebase authentication service. And we'll do set data and get the value from the toJSON function on the user object. That will create a document with the same ID as our user's ID. This will make indexing easier, so we wouldn't have to query and use a where equals ID to find our user object. Back in the authentication service, we can now get the Firestore service from our locator. So we'll create a local private variable of type Firestore service, and we'll get the type from the locator. Then we can head to the sign up with email function, and after doing the create user with email and password call, we will create a new user profile on Firestore by calling the create user function and then constructing a new user object using the user's UID from the auth result as the ID. We'll pass in the email, we'll set the full name as well as the role of the user. Then open up the locator file and we'll add the Firestore service and we'll register it as a lazy singleton. Then to make our testing a bit easier, you can open up the login view and in the text link widget, we will call model.navigate-to-signup. Then in the login view model, we can create a new function that returns a type void called navigate-to-signup. And all we'll do in there is call on the navigation service.navigate-to function and pass it the signup view route. Now we can head back to the main view and change our home back to the startup view again. If you run the code now, you should land on the login view, and if you click the create account link, we'll get to the sign up view. If we now enter all of our details into the sign up view, we select our role and click on the sign up. You can open up the console in the background and you'll see that once we have signed up, a new user is created in the database collection. We can also see that the full name is null, which means that we forgot to pass in the value from the text editing controller for full name. So open up the sign up view, go down to the busy button where we call the sign up function and pass the full name controller.text value to the full name property of the sign up function. The last thing we want to do is make the user information readily available as soon as the app lands on its first usable view. We already have a function to check if the user is logged in. Within that function, we can do a user refresh, which will fetch the information from Firestore and keep it locally for us to use whenever we require it. The first thing we have to do is create the Firestore function on the Firestore service. Open up the Firestore service and create a new function called getUser that takes in the user ID. We'll create the same try-catch statement as above, where we will return the message of the exception when there's an error. Within the body of the try statement, we'll create a new variable called user data where we will store the document with the ID UID. We don't need real-time updates at the moment, so we'll simply call get on the document reference of the user ID. Then for the return value, we will construct a user from the data of the user data variable. Then you can go to the authentication service, and at the top of the authentication service, we'll add a new private variable of type user called current user. We'll then also create a public facing getter property called current user, which will return the current user private variable. Since this function to refresh the user will be used in multiple places, we'll create a new private function of type future called populate current user that takes in a Firebase user as the parameter. We'll check if the user is not equal to null, and if it's not equal, we will set the private current user variable equal to the get user function from the Firestore service, and we'll pass in the UID from the user object. And so like I mentioned earlier, we want to make this an automatic process. So as soon as we check if the user is logged in, we also want to populate the current user before we return the value of the isUserLoggedIn function. Then additionally, once a user logs in, we also want to make sure that we fetch whatever user profile information we have on Firestore if there is any. We will rename the user variable to authResult because I made a mistake and thought that the user is returned from that function, but it's actually also an authResult. And for the result of the return, we're going to return authResult.user is not equal to null. Then in the sign up with email function, we'll cut out the user that we construct to pass into the create user function, and we'll set it equal to the current user. Then for the create user function, we'll just pass in the current user, meaning as soon as we've signed up, we also have the user information ready to be used within the application. We'll just run the app quickly to check if everything's fine, and you'll see that it still works. So having the user information available as soon as the startup view has finished is very important, because in the future we'll have to request the information from Firestore using the user ID as well as the user type. So having it in the authentication service makes it a lot easier for any view model that requires the user ID or the user type to fetch information, as we'll see in one of the future videos. That's it for this week. We have the basics of authentication done. Next week we'll be looking at Firestore. We'll do some real-time updates as well as pagination using the Firestore library. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you're enjoying this series, and I'll see you guys next week.